I always believed that love was supposed to protect you. That when you chose someone to build a life with, their arms would become the safest place in the world, their voice the sound that anchored you, their loyalty the shield that would never crack. That was what I thought when I met Adil. And for a while it felt real. It felt like all the silly romance stories I had secretly consumed late at night, imagining myself as the girl who finally found the one who wouldn't hurt her. I was 24 when he proposed. We had been seeing each other for a year. Our families already aware, his mother especially enthusiastic about the match. "You're perfect for each other," she would say, holding my hand like I was already her daughter. "I prayed for a girl like you for my son." My parents were cautious, but approving. Adil was educated, soft-spoken, respectful. He seemed to have ambition, stability, and the kind of manners you can't fake. Or maybe he could. The engagement was beautiful. Relatives showered us with blessings, cousins teased us. Adil slipped the ring onto my finger with that smile I thought I'd never get tired of. I remember looking at his face that night and thinking, this is it. This is the start of forever. But forever has a way of crumbling faster than you realize. It started small. Whispers I overheard when his mother thought I wasn't listening. Comments about how I should adjust after marriage, about how a good wife knows when to keep quiet, about how sacrifices define love. I brushed them off, telling myself every family had its quirks. Then came Adil's subtle changes. Where once he texted me long paragraphs, now his replies were one-word answers. Where he used to show up early to meet me, now he always had excuses: work, friends, stress. I convinced myself he was just busy. But there were cracks I couldn't ignore. One evening, a cousin of mine sent me a screenshot. It was Adil on social media, commenting under another girl's photo. Not just a harmless emoji. No, it was the kind of message that dripped with familiarity. "Only you could make this look so good." My cousin asked carefully if we were okay. I laughed it off, but my chest was burning. That night, when I confronted him, he brushed it aside with a grin. "You're overthinking. She's just a friend." His tone was so casual, so dismissive, that for a moment I doubted myself. But a seed had been planted, and it grew roots fast. Weeks turned into months, and the signs multiplied. Secret phone calls he'd step outside to take. Messages he'd delete before I could glance at his screen. A new cologne he wore when he said he was just meeting the guys. And then, the biggest one, his sudden reluctance to discuss the wedding. He used to be eager, asking about venues and colors. Now he shrugged. "Whatever you want," he'd say. I told myself he was just stressed. That maybe I was reading too much into things. That love meant trust, and trust meant giving him the benefit of the doubt. But the knot in my stomach grew tighter. Then came the night everything changed. It was late, past midnight. I had been restless, unable to sleep, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. A notification popped up. It was from a mutual acquaintance, someone I barely spoke to. The message was short. "You should know what Adil is doing." Attached was a photo. Adil, my fiancé, at a restaurant, his arm around another girl. Not a cousin, not a colleague, someone I didn't know. They weren't just sitting. They were leaning in close, smiling, his hand resting on hers in a way that screamed intimacy. My blood ran cold. I stared at the photo until my eyes blurred. My chest felt like it was caving in. I wanted to scream, to smash something, to call him and demand answers. But I didn't. I sat there, shaking, the silence of the night pressing against my ears. The next day, I confronted him with the picture. For a split second, I saw guilt flash across his face. But then it was gone, replaced by that same smooth arrogance. "You're really going to believe some random over me?" he said, his voice steady. "People love to create drama. She's just a friend. We were out with a group, but of course someone cropped it to make it look bad. You need to stop being so paranoid." The gaslighting was sharp, cutting. He said it with such confidence that part of me wavered. But deep down I knew. I knew the man I loved was slipping through my fingers, and not because of fate, because he was choosing to betray me. That was the day something in me snapped. I smiled at him. I nodded. I pretended to believe his lies. But inside, a switch had flipped. I realized if I wanted answers, if I wanted justice, if I wanted to protect myself from becoming another foolish wife destroyed by her husband's disloyalty, I needed to play smarter than him.
So I did.
I started small, pretending to be the same sweet, trusting fiancé, letting him think I was too blind, too naive to notice. All the while I began to watch, to listen, to gather. I checked the timing of his excuses, the frequency of his late nights, the new patterns in his behavior. I saved every screenshot, every stray clue. I learned the girl's name. She wasn't just some stranger. She was someone he had known before me, someone his family disapproved of, someone he had quietly rekindled with while pretending to build a future with me. And the worst part? His mother knew. One evening, I overheard her on the phone, her voice hushed but urgent. "Adil, I told you to be careful. If she finds out before the wedding, it will be a scandal. Just keep her calm until we finalize things." That was the moment my heartbreak turned into fire. Not only was Adil betraying me, but his family, the very people who had embraced me, called me their daughter, weren't on it. They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a pawn, a placeholder, a girl they could string along until they arranged whatever future suited them. And I decided, if they wanted to play games, I would learn the rules. But unlike them, I wasn't going to play fair. Because if love was a shield, then betrayal was the sword. And I was done being defenseless. The night I realized Adil's betrayal wasn't just a mistake, but a pattern, a choice, a lifestyle he had woven behind my back, I stopped being his fiancée in my heart. Outwardly, I played the same role, the obedient girl, smiling during family gatherings, discussing wedding dates, pretending to dream about our future. But inside, I was shifting into something else. Something sharper. Because here's the truth no one tells you. When betrayal breaks you, you don't just stay broken. Some people collapse. Others rebuild. But a few, like me, turn the broken pieces into weapons. I started collecting every fragment of truth. At first, I thought I'd confront him again. That maybe, if I pressed harder, if I threw the evidence in his face, he'd confess, maybe even apologize. But what good would that do? A man who could hold another woman's hand while promising me forever wasn't sorry. He was only sorry he got caught. So instead, I became silent. Watching. Waiting. It wasn't easy. There were nights I cried into my pillow, muffling the sobs so my family wouldn't hear. Mornings I woke up with swollen eyes but forced on makeup and a smile. Times when my heart screamed to tell my parents the truth, to beg them to call it all off. But I didn't. Because this wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. It was about dignity. About not walking away like a victim. If Adil wanted to humiliate me, if his family wanted to make me a pawn, then I would make sure the game ended on my terms. My first step was befriending him again. Not the distant, doubtful fiancé I had been in recent weeks, but the girl he had fallen for. I messaged him sweetly, asked about his day, laughed at his jokes. When he made excuses for late nights, I pretended to believe him. And he relaxed. Slowly, his guard dropped. He thought he had won, that his manipulation had worked. But in that comfort, he slipped. I learned her name, Maya. She was bold, outspoken, the type who posted glamorous selfies and didn't care about whispers. They had dated years before, until his family forced him to leave her. Not the right background, they had said. Too modern. Too free. But clearly, Adil had never let her go. And now, while he pretended to plan a life with me, he was secretly trying to keep her too. What he didn't know was that Maya wasn't as discreet as she thought. Through a fake profile, I followed her. I watched her stories. I noticed the little things, a man's hand in a photo, cropped but familiar. A restaurant check-in that matched the one Adil had casually mentioned. A cryptic caption, "Some people can't stay away no matter what their family says." It was all there. Pieces of a puzzle he thought I was too blind to assemble. And then came the second betrayal, this time from his mother. One evening, I went to their house, smiling as always, helping her in the kitchen. She left her phone on the counter while stepping into the storeroom. It buzzed with a message. I wasn't planning to look, but curiosity won. One glance, and my stomach dropped. It was Maya, texting his mother. "Don't worry, Auntie. He promised me it's only a matter of time. Just make sure she doesn't suspect until after the wedding's called off." Called off. They weren't even planning for this wedding to happen. The ring on my finger, the dates we discussed, the clothes my parents had begun buying, it was all a show. Adil's family was stringing us along until they could quietly break the engagement and steer him toward Maya. The humiliation stung like acid. But it also clarified everything. This wasn't just Adil betraying me. This was his entire family treating mine like fools. They thought we were too desperate, too blind, too weak to see the truth. And that was the moment my revenge truly began. I couldn't tell my parents yet. My father was a proud man, my mother sensitive. The news would crush them. Worse, it would give Adil's family the satisfaction of watching us retreat with shame. No, I had to flip the script. So I began laying the groundwork. Gathering proof, every message, every screenshot, every photo. I saved them in hidden folders, even emailed them to myself under code names. Winning trust, I played the perfect fiancé, so that when the moment came, no one could accuse me of being the problem. Studying weaknesses, I paid attention to what mattered most to his family, their reputation. They cared more about what people will say than anything else, which meant the right exposure at the right time would destroy them. But revenge isn't quick. It's patience. And patience was my new best friend. Adil, meanwhile, became bolder. With my guard seemingly down, he stopped hiding as carefully. He'd canceled dinner plans last minute, saying he had a work meeting. He started grooming himself differently, wearing shirts I had never seen, sending money transfers that made no sense. I smiled through it all. I even asked once, innocently, "You're so busy lately, is everything okay?" He kissed my forehead and lied. "It's all for us. I'm working hard to give you the best life." I almost laughed. But the most painful part wasn't Adil, it was Maya. She flaunted him without even naming him. A perfume bottle and a photo, the same one I had gifted Adil on his last birthday. A caption, "He says I'm the only one who understands him." Every time my chest tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. Because soon, she'd regret every smug word. Then, an opportunity came I hadn't expected. My cousin invited me to a friend's wedding. At first, I hesitated, but something told me to go. And I was glad I did because there they were. Adil and Maya. Together. He wasn't supposed to be there. He had told me he was working late. Yet here he was, dressed sharp, his hand on her back, guiding her through the crowd like she was the one wearing his ring. For a moment I froze. Rage and humiliation battled in my chest. But then, strangely, I felt calm. Because this was the proof I needed, not hidden messages, not cropped photos, but something undeniable. I pulled out my phone, and this time it was me who took the photo. Adil, laughing with Maya in the middle of the wedding hall, his hand on hers, surrounded by people who would talk. That night, I didn't cry. For the first time, I felt powerful. Because now, the pieces of my revenge were in place. But I knew better than to act rashly. Timing mattered. I needed to wait until the stakes were highest, until the humiliation would burn deepest. And that moment was coming. Our engagement anniversary, a gathering his family had planned, inviting relatives and neighbors, a night meant to celebrate us. They wanted a show. I would give them one. But not the one they expected. The day of the engagement anniversary arrived like a storm you'd been waiting for with a strange, terrible eagerness. They had made it an event, the kind of family gathering that meant neighbors would turn up, relatives from the next locality would come dressed in their Sunday best, and the whole town would have something to gossip about for weeks. It was exactly the kind of stage Adil's family loved. Shiny, loud, full of witnesses. They wanted validation. They wanted applause. They wanted everyone to see how stable and respectable their plans were. They wanted to show off the girl they'd chosen, the ring on my finger, the ribbons on the car. They did not expect me to change the script. I woke up that morning with my phone heavy in my palm, photo after photo, screenshot after screenshot, transcript after transcript tucked into folders labeled with dates, names, and tiny notes I had written for myself. I went through them once more, not out of doubt but reverence. This was the armor I had built. These were the pieces of truth I had gathered while smiling at them all. These were the things that would make the words liar and cheater dissolve into documented fact. My plan had 3 parts, each deliberate, each designed to be public and unbearable. Stage the reveal in front of everyone during the event when Adil's family's pride and the sheer number of witnesses would magnify the humiliation. Present irrefutable proofs, photos, voice notes, messages, and a recorded confession that could not be rationalized away as misunderstandings. Make sure the exposure rippled beyond our courtyard. I had prepared curated posts, sent packages of documents to certain relatives I trusted outside the family circle, and arranged for a friend to live-stream the key moment to a private group where I knew reputations mattered. I dressed for the part, soft fabric, muted colors, the picture of the obedient, wronged fiancé. People still believed in appearances. I used that like a weapon. When we arrived, the house smelled of flowers and frying oil and all the small, earnest efforts of a household determined to look perfect. His mother greeted me with a hug that had an edge to it, the kind of hug that can bruise. "My daughter," she murmured in that syrupy voice she used in public. "Tonight will be special." Her words were like moths circling a light, beautiful but dangerous. The guests arrived in waves. Laughter filled the patio. Cups clinked. Adil moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands, smiling, occasionally glancing at me like a man making sure his performance was perfect. Maya was nowhere to be seen, which meant she hadn't been invited or had been told to stay away, which also meant the moment would be their moment, to be comfortable, to bask. That comfort would be their undoing. I sat quietly through cake-cutting and silly speeches, syrupy blessings, and the clatter of sympathetic smiles. I nodded when people praised Adil. "Such a good boy," they said. I smiled when they told me how lucky I was. Inside, I felt a cool, surgical calm. The moment would come when I lifted my glass and spoke. When it did, the garden stilled like a held breath. I stood and asked for everyone's attention, a small, practiced voice in a room full of expectation. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began. This night was supposed to be about promises, about celebrating a future. For me, these promises were real. So real that I wanted to believe them. I saw his jaw twitch, the way people do when a lie begins to smell. His mother's hand tightened. But I continued and let the word hang like a blade. Some promises were not for me. Some they made for me were just theater. A ripple of unease ran through the guests. "What are you saying?" His aunt whispered loudly enough that it carried. "I'm saying I've learned a lot in the past few months," I said. "About honesty. About who stands beside you when things are hard. About who uses you as a placeholder while they keep their options open." Conversation flared, the polite kind, the kind that tries to stitch embarrassment shut. Adil's uncle probably leaned in to start a defense when I lifted my phone and pressed play. The first clip was short, grainy footage of him at a small cafe, laughing with Maya, the hand gestures unmistakable. The second was a message thread, dates matched against timestamps, promises of secrecy, references to meetings, a transfer of money that fell 2 days before a business trip. The third was the one I had saved for last, a voice note. It was Adil, speaking into a phone in a low voice, thinking he was unseen. "She's useful for now. Once the formalities are over, I'll tell her it was too messy. I can't keep her, not like this. But I'll make sure she's calm until then. Mothers like her are easier than burning bridges." His laugh in the recording had the casual cruelty of someone who treats hearts like currency. I watched faces change. Color drained from cheeks. His mother's eyes flashed, not with sorrow but with calculation. I could see the mental ledger where she recorded social cost and benefit. Adil's face did not change at first. He was good at stillness. But as the recordings played, something in him cracked. He attempted to speak, to interrupt, a faint protest, but the room had the evidence now, and evidence does not require permission to speak. Where did you get that? He demanded finally, the shock that becomes rage. From the kitchen, his mother's voice came low and dangerous. Who would do such a thing? You shouldn't have. But when I looked her in the eye, I saw no apology. I saw complicity. I saw the woman who had arranged dinners with Maya and whose text to that girl admitted plans in the plainest of words. I had expected gaslighting. The family's first instinct was to spin. They tried. This is private. It's taken out of context. They were just friends. Photos can be edited. But the thing about my proof was that it was stitched together like a legal brief, timestamps, bank notices, geolocation tags from a careless social media post. It wasn't just accusation. It was a map of intentionality. Adil's mouth quivered. You've made a mistake, he hissed. You're destroying everything. Everything. I repeated, and I felt the words in my throat like cold glass. You mean your plans. The life you're trying to build on other people's pain. He lunged at me then, not physically, but with a low, cutting phrase meant to cut and control. If you do this, you'll have no in-laws, no support. You'll leave the village with nothing. People will talk of your foolishness for years. He thought fear would steer me back. Threats are cheap when you're used to wielding them. I stared at him and smiled, a small, exhausted shape of triumph. You are right about one thing, I said quietly. People will talk. Then I made the second move of my plan. I lifted my phone again, sent a single message, and in seconds a silent wave spread across the small private group I had curated. The neighbors who'd seen trains of guests heading to their homes, the cousins who had been mild witnesses, the few relatives from neighboring towns whom Adil's family still respected. I had arranged for the files to be shared, not widely, but to pockets of people who mattered in reputational terms. Names that counted in the business meetings, the charity committees, the modest social circles where future prospects were whispered about. The group chat filled with shocked faces and stunned messages. The news would not be contained to tonight. Panic flickered across his mother's face. She pulled out a folded note from her sleeve, one of those old-school tricks, a list of relatives to call, allies to invoke. But the phone is a louder ally these days. Once the first judgments fluttered across social feeds, the scaffolding that his mother had been building for years began to tremble. The third act was surgical.
I had one more thing, a contract.
Months earlier, I had somehow coaxed a copy of a paper from the arrangement talks, notes from Adil's mother about dowries and timing, suggestions about calling off once the house in X is clear. It was humiliating and tangible. I produced it in front of everyone. The ink faded but legible, a piece of old cruelty made modern by my willingness to look. It was the kind of thing that draws a line. Up until then, some relatives wanted to believe there had been a misunderstanding. But a printed list of plans with dates and names and a condescending tone about who was meant to be replaced was heat. People shifted in their seats. Conversations stopped. They started at us. The architect of the scheme stared at us, his chest rising and falling with an animal's panic. He tried to shout back, "You're making this up. She's trying to ruin me." But the room had already made its decision in those few minutes. The proofs, the recordings, the social reach. It was a verdict delivered in seconds. His mother's face was a study in collapse. The same woman who had hugged me like a daughter now avoided my eyes, as though she could pretend I had never existed. And Adil, he stood there, suddenly very young, very small. The bravado that had carried him through affairs and lies evaporated like smoke. What followed in the hours after was a cascade. Neighbors we had not seen in a decade pulled out of arranged friendships. Shopkeepers who had quietly supported his father's small ventures began to distance themselves. A cousin who had once courted a business deal with him called to say he could no longer associate. A woman who chaired a local charity that his mother had been proud of sent a careful, cold message. "We can discuss this privately." The meaning was clear. I had intended to strike hard. I had not expected how naked the family would look as they were stripped. I had not expected my parents to look at me with a hesitant pride, a complicated, trembling gratitude. They hugged me that night in the privacy of our small living room, hands cramped and eyes wet. My father said nothing, but I could see in his mouth the words he couldn't say. He was sorry. He was proud. He was grieving the cost to what he had imagined for his daughter. Adil, though, did not disappear quietly. He lashed out, first with anger then with bargaining. In private, he tried to bargain with me. Promises, fake remorse, offers to fix things and buy back respect. He called late at night, his voice a greasy rope, trying to pull me back with intimacy and guilt. He sent messages with flowers. He sent a packet of cash to my mother in a clumsy envelope. He threatened public spectacle, tried to tarnish me as the woman ruined by ambition, suggested I was the one seeking humiliation. His friends whispered to mine, trying to create doubt. When that failed, he turned viciously to lies about my character. But the difference now was community memory. People who had once indulged his family were watching the details, and the gravity of the proof kept the sympathies from swaying back. In the days that followed, offers to help him dry up. A business partner postponed meetings. An aunt who once lured women into marriages by using favors wrote a message to my mother. We must reconsider how we treat our daughters. I had wanted revenge, yes. I had wanted him to pay for the nights he spent in the arms of another, for the deliberate plans to make me a placeholder until a better arrangement came along. But what I did not expect, and what surprised me with a cold relief, was how my action forced a quiet clarification around my mother and father. The community's public reaction was not only about punishment, it was about accountability. It was about making sure future daughters would not be treated as props. The weeks after the reveal were strange. There was no cinematic montage of victory. There was instead a slow unwinding of relationships, of edges softening, of practical repercussions. A wage earner who had planned to marry his son into Adil's family withdrew when questioned about the values that had produced such a scandal. A mutual friend who had been indifferent until now sent me a long message that said, "I'm so sorry you had to go through this. I won't pretend there was no cost. There were dinners I did not attend. There were invitations that would never come. There were the little slights that accumulate like pebbles in your shoe, whispers at bazaars, eyes sliding away when I passed. But those were small prices compared to the weight of living a lie with my head bowed." And then came the last move, the one I had planned more for me than for them. A month after the public reveal, after the initial shock had faded to a simmering anger, and after Adil had been forced into a humiliating, uneasy pseudo-apology on national social media, where his attempt to spin things fell flat and only made him look smaller, I arranged for something small but precise. A friend of mine, someone both my mother and I trusted, had a cousin who ran a small venture in another city, building bespoke accessories and garments. He was respectful, kind, and had an old-fashioned way of seeing people as people, not as status. He had admired me from afar, always polite, always present. He was not rich. He was gentle. He was also, as I found out in conversation, someone who believed marriages should be built on honesty. We met, simply, for tea at a friend's boutique. There were no fireworks, no cinematic declarations. There were, instead, long conversations about what we valued, about family, about small, honest things. He asked about my dreams. I listened to his. It felt like unbroken air. I could have chosen to cut off everything and go elsewhere, to leave the community and start anew. For a while I considered it. But something inside me, hardened by months of grief, wanted a different kind of answer. Not escape, necessarily, but a life that made the principle of my fight tangible. I wanted to build something domestic without the rot that had once been so carefully hidden. We married modestly, quietly, within months. It was not an act of spite, it was an act of reclamation. Where Adil had built lies on top of promises, I wanted a life built on clarity. I chose to be seen by people who valued me, not as a trophy, but as a partner. Adil watched the wedding in the distance. He sent a message, curt, resentful, the kind that reads like a final, worried breath. "You'll regret this," it said. He always underestimated the quiet, steady things. Regret, for him, would be not having been honest. For me, regret evaporated like rain in sunlight. Time, of course, did what it always does. The scandal cooled. Families repaired where they wished to repair. Some relatives tried to re-extend hands. Others had been stripped of too much credibility to be welcomed back warmly. My parents recovered a little. My father resumed his quiet ways, buying small things for the house he'd once worried would be tainted. My mother resumed making Tuesday breakfasts and taking in old neighbors' sewing orders. Life crept forward. My heart, too, healed in its own slow, crooked way. The nights I had once spent hollowed out by betrayal were replaced by small domesticities, tending plants, learning how to make their favorite tea, laughing at the little predictable things that people learn to love about each other. There were no triumphant declarations, simply a steadiness that felt, in its own blunt way, like victory. But not everything healed. The memory of betrayal sits like a faint scar. It's always there if you stare too long. Sometimes I would catch a scent that made me flinch, or overhear a phrase and find my jaw clench. Trust is a fragile architecture, and some foundations once cracked never quite mend to their original strength. And yet, when I look back, I don't see only fury or only pain. I see a girl who learned her worth not through mercy, but through will. I see a woman who refused to be erased and who performed the slow, difficult work of reclaiming herself. I see a life that, while bruised, is her own. There was one last moment, a small, private punctuation that felt like a full stop to the chapter. A few years after everything, I was walking through the market when I saw Adil across the street. He was thinner, slower. The lines of arrogance softened into a weary caution. He looked like a man who had been reduced to his raw outline by consequences. He saw me. His eyes flicked like a bird that recognizes the direction of a storm. For a moment our gazes met. He offered no apology. Perhaps he had said them and had them ignored. Perhaps he understood the cost and knew he had nothing to offer that wouldn't be consumed by the past.
We did not speak.
I inclined my head, a small, final acknowledgement, not of victory over him, but of a truth that had been carved through both of our lives. When I walked away, people in the market murmured, a small soundtrack of the ordinary. My hand brushed against the fabric of my dress, and I felt the ordinary comfort of it, the soft weight of a life chosen, not given. Revenge had not been a moment of fireworks. It had not been a single dramatic act that fixed everything. It had been a careful dismantling, a public unraveling of a lie, and then the hard work of building something truthful from the ruins. It cost me friends, false safety, nights of sleep. It also returned my voice and my dignity. In the end, it was not only punishment I sought, it was reclamation. If you had asked me, years earlier, if I'd have wanted to change the story, I might have said yes. But now I know that the girl I was at 24, shiny with naive promise, needed to be broken and remade. Not to become vicious or cold, but to become wise and whole. So when the market hum fades and the sun dips low, I close my shop, my hands smell faintly of stitch and thread, and I think of all that happened. I think of Adil's voice in that secret recording, of his mother's polite cruelty, of Maya's flashy smiles, of the ledger of small daily betrayals. I think of the night I stood and pressed play. And I smile, not because I won a battle, but because I learned to keep my own life from being written by someone else. The end of their story did not give me everything. It gave me the space to write my own.